David Lovegrove. Welcome to Viking Superpowers. In today's video, in celebration of the launch of my new book, Viking Superpowers Way of Asgard, I'm going to reveal to you the smoking gun which I reveal at the end of the book. This is the most profound evidence, as far as I'm concerned, of ancient paleo contact in the north. And it really is one of the best pieces of evidence I've ever seen from anywhere in the world. In my book, I reveal lost and perhaps suppressed information that I've discovered both in reading the ancient texts and looking at the sacred carvings found all over Scandinavia, in Denmark, Sweden and Norway, that point to stories of beings that are often called gods, but really, to me, seem to be something else. Pictures of what we call sun wheels, which I've revealed in other videos, that seem definitely to be great flying craft, often putting down a cone of light, perhaps abducting people, or perhaps the cone generally tends to have a laddered feel to it, especially in artifacts. I'll put up two now for you to see. But these great craft are represented all over Scandinavia, and I think that the stories of Snorri Sturluson, the stories that he tells in his Prose Edda, and the stories that he tells in the early part of his great history of the Norse kings, which is called The Globe of the World, Heimskringla, that's in a book called Ynglinga Saga. I believe that he's telling the stories that are carved into the much more ancient rock faces in Scandinavia. So what I want to reveal to you today is something that really came to me after I came back from my research tour in Scandinavia. Something that I'd seen when I was a young, super keen teenage Viking Age and Scandinavian ancient history buff, and I found it in a little shop called The Booksmith. Now, where I lived in Brisbane, there's a little old train station just near us, and I guess some kind of train-related shed. Maybe it used to be the ticket office, but in the 70s and 80s it had been converted into shops. And in the mid-80s, when I first started going there, there was a rare bookshop, you might say, run by an Englishman. I wish I remembered his name to give him a shout-out, but he was a very friendly man. He had a beard, and he was a scholarly type. He had a tweed jacket, often like I'm wearing, when it was cool enough to wear that in Brisbane. And he used to supply me with the most amazing books. And whenever I came there, he'd go out of his way to go and find things. And this one particular day, I've got the date of it, it was the 12th of the 7th, 1985. I walked in and he said, "Dave, I've got something for you. This will really rock your boat." So he showed me this book. And I realised it was by Professor P.V. Glob, who'd written another book that I really loved called The Bog People. Now, that's a bit of a funny name, but it's literally about ancient people found in bogs, what they call peat bogs. And amongst the people in there is a gentleman who became world famous because his head is so well preserved, it looks like he just woke up and he needs a shave, and you can see a bit of a picture of him there, and this is him lying curled up, and he met quite an unfortunate end. He was actually strangled with this rope, they believe. So this is around about the time of Christ, around about 0 BC, and he seems to have been either a sacrifice, maybe he was an enemy warrior, captured warrior who was sacrificed, or maybe there was something else going on for why they sacrificed him, but his feet and his head are immaculately preserved. So I bought this book from the Booksmith. Professor Glob's books are excellent. It turns out this book is about Scandinavia as well, but going back another 2,000 years, or 1,000 to 2,000. So this is about people who are found in burial mounds throughout Scandinavia. This is particularly based in Denmark, but ancient people who are probably elite people who are buried in burial mounds. And they just found the most incredible preservation of clothes, ornaments that they wore, and different things. What I want to show you today is one of the most remarkable things in this book that I can remember clearly. When I first saw this, I thought, wow, now that is different. There's something very mysterious going on here. Let's have a look at the first, what I consider the first side of it. The stone, which shows us two ships. Now, you mightn't recognise ships at first. My children thought this was a crab, the one at the bottom, with those curved prow, and it looks like some kind of teeth or projections on an exoskeleton. But this is a typical representation of a sailing ship of the period, a warship. If you have a look closely, you'll see that there's 10 shapes on the top. When you look at a few different versions, you'll see that there's like slight head shapes. And when you hear the reading that I have of this pictographic language, this language of pictures, it's the same as the language developed by the Chinese people in ancient days, where you want a cow, you draw a cow. The way we can do still to this day, if we're talking to somebody who doesn't speak our language and we don't have a way to do it, we draw a picture. So here we're seeing a ship, and then above it, something that Professor Glob also considered to be a ship, but it's not the same. It's got those same inward curving pieces that are what we call a prow. In the Viking ships, they tend to curve the other way. Okay, now let's have a close look at that ship above. There's something strange about this ship. First thing I notice is that it seems to be covered in stars, what look like stars to me. Mainstream archaeologists call these cup marks, and they tend to say we don't know what these mean. For me, in a lot of cases, they're obviously representing stars, and I'm not alone in that. Some archaeologists have made that connection. But if you look at this stone that I saw in the University Library of Lund, where I saw that fabulous Voland the Elf brooch, the flying elf in the flying machine. So what we can see here is a shape that is not curving upwards. It's a shape that's curving. It's flattish on the bottom. It does seem to have a slight curve, but it's got a definite curve on the top. Now, when I first saw this, I thought it looks like an aircraft. It looks like something with two wings flying at us. And then I started to realise that it actually looks like a flying saucer from the side. And I'll just put up now some pictures of the Turkish UFO that Chris Leto told me about quite a while ago. He introduced me to all these fabulous Turkish UFO images, and I've been revisiting them recently, and really they're the most astounding things. And Chris is a really believable man because he's a fighter pilot. He's a retired fighter pilot, F-16 pilot, Top Gun sort of guy. Really knows his stuff, and also he lived in Turkey for a couple of years. You can see if we compare these two, there's an uncanny sort of similarity. So I'm going to come back to this, but I'll just turn the page. Now, on the side of the rock, there is a picture which they call a potent figure. The narrow side of the Truehøj Farm stone with potent figure. Now, everyone loves to have a laugh, and this guy's definitely got a willy. But I believe pictographically that's just saying this is a male. And when you look closely at him, he's quite a dwarf. He's quite short. He's got a very big head, a long nose, a big chin. Seems fairly broad across the shoulders, and he's not, I wouldn't call him skinny. But he's in action, and as an artist I really like the way they've put him in action. And I see him as striding. I see his right arm going back on the right and the hand curving back. And I see his left arm curving forward in quite a naturalistic stance. But there's something about that left hand as if it's beckoning. That's the way I see it anyway. So who's this? Why are we seeing this on the side of a rock that portrays two strange ships? Well, I'll have more to say about this guy, but I believe he's what the old Norse writers, what Snorri Sturluson called a dvergar. Dvergar. It means dwarf in our modern nomenclature, but it's actually a mysterious word. It doesn't always seem to indicate a small person, but in this case I think he definitely is a small person. So if we turn to the last side of the rock, the third side, here we get really pretty strange. You'll see when we go in close that there's a little foot with 3 toes. It's got a heel, but it's an unusual shape. It's quite a long foot. And now if we compare it to the big foot beside it, which is obviously a human foot, you can see that it's about half the size of a human foot. This big broad foot, which I called a splore foot, that's what my dad used to call great big broad bare feet. When I was a child in the 60s in Queensland, Australia, boys didn't have to wear shoes to school, and we by preference lived without shoes. So this is a human foot, and I think it's a Bronze Age warrior's foot. And beside this we've got what looks like a blob, and when you see this other stone that I got a couple of days ago, I finally found it after much searching, a lot of searching. It's really hard to find anything about this stone. I found that they've painted it in a very different way, and it doesn't really look like a foot or a print at all. But if we look at Professor Glob's original, even though I don't totally agree with the way he's painted it, it's starting to look more like a foot. Now, if we go in close and have a look at the photo of the bare rock before it's painted, I want to point out to you a few things. Essentially, there's a heel shape up the top there, and then a definite break between that heel shape and the front of the foot. Now, if you look at the left side of that foot, I think this is a boot print. And if you look at that straight line on that edge there, that's exactly how we draw boots and shoes and even feet. It's a sort of an artistic mnemonic that inside of the edge, that inside of the leg where the edge of the foot is usually relatively straight, even though we know there's an arch in the middle there if you're looking 3D at a foot. There's that straight edge, and then it fans out past the big toe, comes back in a line, and then back towards the rear of the foot where you have the heel again. So this is quite it's quite a convincing boot print to me. Now, to the right of that, we see once again these cup marks, which, as I said, are usually considered unexplainable, don't know what they are. I tend to see them as stars, and in this case, the first time I looked at this recently, I can't remember what I thought back in the 80s, but when I looked at it again recently, I straight away thought that has to be a constellation of some kind. And knowing constellations has not been a hobby of mine. As an Australian, I know the Southern Cross, which all Australians know because it's on our flag. As far as thinking of other constellations or, horoscope shapes of stars and such, I really just couldn't. I was lost. I wrote to my friend Paul Wallace about it because I know he's written about constellations in the past, but he really couldn't come up with something straight away either. We wrote back and forth a little bit. He at first thought it could be Cygnus, which is a constellation he wrote about in his latest book, The Eden Enigma, talking about the people called the Dingir, these people who came from the stars, landed on the earth in Turkey near a place called Lake Van. And this is another subject we've talked about, who these people are, and there's a people in the Viking stories called the Vanir, and there's a great lake called Lake Vanern, and Freya, the great love goddess, was one of the Vanir, and that great lake in Sweden, that's also probably named as a homage to her because she was also called Gefjon. the beautiful woman who seduced King Gylfi, the wizard king of Sweden, into allowing her to take a great chunk of his land and use that to build a new home base over in the Sound to make the island of Sealand, which is still there, of course. That's where Copenhagen is. Anyway, long story short, I eventually found a picture of the constellation Pleiades. And straight away I could see it was the same thing. Now, there's lots of stars in these constellations, and as I said, I'm not an expert, but you'll see up on the screen now a representation of the Pleiades that's very similar to this. And you'll see from the bottom there's like two stars, and then they go out to the right, and they go a little bit left, and you see two stars, and then a further one. I think what we're looking at here is a story about first contact, a story about a quite incredible, shocking, exhilarating thing that happened to some humans. And what I'd like to do is read this to you in the way that I see it. So let's go back to that first page, as it were, that side of the rock. This says, we were out, all 20 of us, friends, warriors, brothers, were out on the sea. And then we saw something flying in the sky, and it seemed like a ship, but had an unusual shape. And I'll talk from the point of view of the artist. So what I'm showing you here is the shape of that ship. I've put these marks here because our ships have the same curving prow, but I've put stars here, and I'll tell you why in a second. But when you put these two words together, you'll realize that what I've written here is starship. So this page of the story is saying to us, we're out in a ship and we saw a starship. And the fact that it's smaller gives us the clue that it's at a bit of a distance at first. We're seeing this thing coming, and I believe we're seeing it coming down. So the starship landed. The starship opened up. There was a great bright light, and a little man came out. Now this little man probably was wearing some kind of suit. This little man had strange things on his feet. I'm now going to show you up on the screen a different painting of this and zoom in on his feet. And what you'll see in the interpretation of the archaeologists who painted this, those feet seem to have soles. In fact, they really look like some kind of funky space age boots. So this could be the right interpretation. Perhaps the first one, the Professor Glob one from the early 70s, it looks like sort of bare feet, though, there's no toes obviously, but this is carving in rock and it's very ancient, so maybe, he couldn't carve it so you could see the toes, but it almost looks like boots. So the little man came out and he waved to us and he said, "Come, come." So being warriors, we didn't want to show fear, even though all of us undoubtedly felt pretty scared inside. So we rowed our ship to the bank, tied up, or put down our anchor. Some stayed on board, and the most important leaders got off, including me. So we went up to the little man, and when we got to him, we saw that he was wearing strange clothes, and perhaps they looked like the skin of a fish. Perhaps they looked like our modern clothes would look like to a person from 4,000 years ago, just very odd. We just know that they met this little man. Now, when we look at the third page of the story, I believe what we're seeing here is the artist rendering what he's seen on the ground. And you can imagine a somewhat soft, maybe clay-like riverbank or somewhere by the sea where footsteps have been left, footprints have been left in the soil. So what the artist is telling us here is that we met this little man, and I've shown you here the size of my foot and the size of his foot. So you can see that he's not a human like us. He's got 3 toes, and I have 5. His feet are not only short, but they're very slender. And beside it, there's another footprint. And this came from a big man that came out of the starship, who waved to us, who was wearing a similar outfit to the little man. And he came up and he talked to us. And in my book, I sort of tell this story, and using the sort of stories we have about abductions and close encounters of the fifth kind, perhaps this being talked to the warriors in their minds telepathically. And he told them where they were from. And he said to them, we come from the stars originally, and that's the star group that contains our planet. And he showed them, perhaps he pointed out in the sky, or perhaps he drew it on the ground. But the artist has recorded it here. He says he comes from this. And we, the future generations, so far in the future, we call it the Pleiades. They could have called it anything. Interestingly enough, it's known that the Pleiades played quite a significant part in the metal furniture of the people from this time in Scandinavia. You'll see on the other side there's another group of stars, and I don't really know what they represent yet. This is an ongoing piece of research for me. I'm not saying I know exactly what this is all about, but I think I've really cracked the code, and I believe that this big shape is the boot print of the big man who came out of the starship. And I also like to think perhaps the artist who was there on the spot might have cut out that bit of clay and took it home and dried it out and then made this message for us in the future. He made a message for those in the future who would be able to comprehend it. Undoubtedly, this stone was a sacred stone. After that, it told this story of something so fantastic that many people in subsequent generations might have doubted that it was true, or maybe they also had a lot of experiences with these people. And I think the second idea is probably true, because that's the story I'm telling in my book, Viking Superpowers, Way of Asgard, is that these very powerful people in the Middle East, along with a lot of other very powerful people at the time, were from the stars, but they'd probably been on Earth for a very long time. They were very long living, and I consider that they had bases on the land and bases up in the sky, orbiting bases, that they had star bridges, connections. This is another video, but there's so much in my book that you'll find really fascinating, and you'll never see the Norse stories the same again after you've read my book. And there's a series of books coming after which will delve deeply even more into this, into human superpowers, into paranormal abilities that humans have, and it seems that these powerful people the Aesir had. My last thought is that there's a good possibility that the person who drew this and carved it, and this is a very hard stone, so this is quite a difficult and devoted work to make this stone, make this message for us, the people now who can comprehend and even believe that this is true. He wanted us to know that we're not alone in the universe. He wanted to know that there's beings that are strange yet relatable, that are as intelligent as us, and obviously more intelligent, more knowledgeable. And perhaps this stone represents the very start of a long time interaction between these powerful beings, these Aesir, and some of the people of Earth. And as you would know, that stories like this occur all around the world, some in Asia, some in Africa, some in the Americas. But I'm focusing on Scandinavia because that's my interest and that's my passion and my knowledge base. I've been studying Icelandic for, well, too long really, but I've always loved it. I started in 1976. I've come and gone with it, but over the last several years I've really devoted myself to Icelandic, put my head down, gathered a lot of books, but I've gathered this incredible collection thanks to the generosity of a family from Sydney who an Icelandic friend of mine had got to know. They'd contacted him and said, we've got our father's library of Old Norse books and articles and stories, and we want to give them to somebody. The universities don't want them, but lucky for me, and if somebody doesn't take them, we're going to have to throw them. We're going to have to put them in landfill, the crime of the century. So, of course, I took them, and there is so much to learn in here. As I get better and better with my Old Norse comprehension, I'm just finding outstanding things. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that tantalized you, that story of this first contact meeting between ancient people and beings from somewhere else. And I hope you get the chance to have a look at my book. It's available on Amazon. It's an ebook and a paperback. I think it's reasonably priced. I've tried to make a price that I would pay for something that really is quite priceless. And there's a lot more in the book, which I'll be talking in the series of videos after this. So I just want to wish you well. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks so much for coming along. Please make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, as they say. And also, please tell your friends about me. Please put this out there, because I think what I'm discovering is very significant. As so many other people are discovering very significant things. We're in a fascinating period now where we know that the government authorities have finally admitted, yes, there is a presence here, and yes, it's been here for a long time. But people like me and people like you are thinking outside the square, questioning the standard of history, and starting to realize that our history is, even though I love history, it's even more exciting than I ever thought it was. So I'll see you later.